Vasishta continued, just as an army fashioned with clay is nothing but clay figurines, the entire universe is pure self and non-dual. The thing about clay figurines is they don't do anything. They're just clay. And yet I suspect the Chinese emperor, who's famous for the clay armies that were found by archaeologists, thought that perhaps they were more than clay. In the film Castaway with Tom Hanks, the Tom Hanks character was marooned on an island, and he developed a relationship with a ball with a face painted on it. It was a very powerful portrayal and very moving. This ball became an entity which he was emotionally attached to, so much so that he even almost sacrificed his life for it on one occasion. This might be seen as a manifestation of insanity, imbuing an inanimate object with a personality, with character, entering into an emotional relationship with it. But I think this film was actually portraying something very real there. I think this film wasn't demonstrating insanity, it was demonstrating a very real need for there to be another. We need an other to relate to, and if there isn't another, we create another. And this is what we do. This is fundamental to our existence. The entire universe is pure self and non-dual. And what do? We create another. Since this non-dual self alone exists, what is object, and by whom is it perceived? In other words, there can't be any such thing as objects. Objects in the sense of separate entities. And there can't be any perception of such objects either, because there aren't any such objects, and also because there's nobody to perceive. In fact, how can there be any perception? Apart from that supreme self, there is nothing which can be referred to as I or as mine. So perhaps it was insanity on the part of the Tom Hanks character. Perhaps he could have rested in himself, but his mind was agitated, and he was identifying with that mind. Rama said, "If that is so, Lord, why should evil action be abandoned, and why should one be devoted to good action?" Now this is an interesting question. Whenever you express a spiritual truth, it's going to cause problems. There are cultural, philosophical, religious assumptions that truth is going to come up against. And Rama is expressing the reaction to the truth from that viewpoint. We can understand it as a religious response, be good, otherwise you go to hell. Or it could be just from the point of view of moral, social development. Who can argue with being devoted to good actions and avoiding evil actions? But if there's no I, if the universe is non-dual, then what does that boil down to? This can be taken as a philosophical question, but we want to pursue this question and realize the spiritual truth behind it, and not just come up with a philosophical answer. Vasishta said, "But first tell me, O Ram, what is action? How does action arise? What is its root? And how is that root to be destroyed?" So we've got the notion of action. We've got the notion that we're actually doing something. If you identify with your ego, if that's what you are, then of course it's a good idea to cultivate good actions and avoid bad actions. But if you're looking beyond the ego, then actions become irrelevant. It's only as much as you're identifying with an ego is your behaviour an issue. So Vasishta said, but first tell me, O Ram, what is action? How does action arise? What is its root? And how is that root to be destroyed? So rather than answer the question in Ram's terms, Vasishta wants to go beyond action, go beyond notions of good and bad actions, and look at how the very notion of action can be destroyed, because it's the same as going beyond the ego sense. Ram said. So Ram looks into it, Ram inquires into it. Surely, Lord, that which has to be destroyed must be completely uprooted and its very roots destroyed. So we have to look very, very deep. As long as the body lasts, there is action. So the body does things, so there's action. It is rooted in this samsara world appearance. Well, certainly the notion of the body is rooted in notions of a world, an external world. In that body, actions spring from the limbs, organs of action. Vasana, or mental habit, is the seed for the organs of action. So we act in accordance with our innate tendencies. This mental habit functioning through the senses is capable of comprehending that which is at a great distance. These senses themselves are rooted in the mind. The mind is rooted in the jiva, which is conditioned consciousness, and this in turn is rooted in the unconditioned, which is therefore the root of all. Brahman is the root of this unconditioned, and Brahman has no roots. Thus all actions are based on consciousness, which objectifies itself and thus generates actions. If this does not happen, that itself is the supreme state. So Ram's taken the notion of actions and traced this notion back until he's arrived at Brahman, on which everything depends, and which we can say is beyond actions. Vasishta said, in that case, O Ram, what is to be done and what is to be abandoned? In other words, we live in harmony with the complete picture, and then we don't have to worry about being good or being bad. The mind continues to exist as long as the body continues to live, whether the embodied person is enlightened or ignorant. So we've always got the mind, we don't destroy the mind. This is often what's said, that we have to destroy the mind. We have to destroy our attachment to notions, our fetishistic attachment to notions. How can one abandon what is known as the jivahood, individuality? But one should abandon that wrong notion of I do, and be engaged in the performance of appropriate action. On the awakening of the inner intelligence, the world perception ceases and there arises psychological freedom or non-attachment. And this is what Rama's indicated. That is known as emancipation. When the objective or conditioned perception is abandoned, there is peace, which is known as Brahman. Perception or awareness of objects is known as action, which expands into the samsara or world appearance. Cessation of such awareness is known as emancipation. So here we have a definition of action. Perception or awareness of objects is known as action. Once you subscribe to the notion of perception, then you get caught up in action, notions of action. So the notion of perception leads to the notion of action, leads to the notion of a self, the notion of an external world, and interaction between the two in the form of perception. Therefore, O Ram, abandonment of action is inappropriate as long as the body lives. So you don't abandon it. Such abandonment gives action a value. That which is valued cannot be abandoned.